I'll just start with a very quick introduction of myself. So, my name is Disha. I have been working at Public for the past 2 years now. As some of you might already know, Public is a UK-based digital transformation advisory firm. We work with local government, central government, loads of that. And the idea is that we have helped loads of central government and local government offices transform their procurement services. We also run loads of open innovation programs and have experience of working with early stage startups, helping them navigate the public procurement process, which can be quite confusing and complex if you are new to it, especially. For today, I thought it would be really interesting to look at three main things. We'll firstly give you a quick understanding of what the UK public procurement landscape looks like. Then we'll talk about a few tricks and tips for how you can get started on your journey to sell to the UK government. And then we'll touch on a few key policy changes that might affect your sales currently or in the coming future. Um, in that case, I'll very quickly get started onto the first section, which is the intro to public procurement. In a very simple one liner, procurement is how public authorities buy things. It is quite a crucial pillar of services that ensures that public money is utilized and spent in an effective, efficient, and sustainable manner. To give you a few figures, as per the UK Treasury, the UK government last year spent around £434 billion on purchasing goods, services, and supplies. It accounts a total 3% of total public expenditure, and the UK government spends around 14% of the UK's GDP on public procurement. The idea, saying all of this, just to kind of underline that the government is a big buyer of things, and that if you are interested in selling to the government, there is loads of opportunity for you to do so. But again, completely understand that it is quite a complex environment to navigate, and therefore that's the aim of today's session, to kind of also tell you who the key actors within this landscape are. At the very apex of it is procurement authorities such as the Cabinet Office, HM Treasury, and the government commercial function, who are kind of responsible for setting the tone and telling you what the procurement regulations are. So if you are interested in looking at more detailed procurement guidance, if you go to the Cabinet Office's website, there's loads of information on that. Then there's something called as purchasing bodies. So you have central as well as regional purchasing bodies, which are basically platforms on which you need to get onto in order to sell to the public sector. Then there's the central and wider public sector buyers. This includes anyone and everyone within the public sector. I have just added a few examples just as indications. So you have the central government departments such as MHCLG, local councils like the Camden Council, and then also the wider public sector, which includes organizations like the NHS trusts. So it's quite a big sector. There's loads of opportunity, and today we'll be delving deep into how you can get started on that. Moving on a very high level, the procurement process itself can be broken down into four clear phases. So the first phase starts with planning, where a public authority kind of scopes out its requirements and tells you, and is just internally assessing what it wants to procure next. You can participate in that process through market engagement events, as well as to submitting answers to expression of interest forms. So a quick tip is to always engage in these activities and events when you see one in sectors and with government authorities that you are interested in working with, because you're kind of helping them understand that there is not only an interest, but also quite valuable and reliable solutions in the market for what they're requiring. Once they not only understand what they want, but also what's available in the market, they kind of move on to phase two, which is the tendering process. In this stage, the public authority that's interested in procuring will go out and seek and put out a public procurement opportunity. As a supplier, your aim should be kind of to prepare and submit an offer or a bid in response to the opportunity that has been showcased. What happens then is that the government authority will, in the third phase, kind of evaluate the bid or proposal that you've sent across. It will evaluate this bid that you've sent across based on the eligibility and evaluation criteria, which it very transparently would have already like conveyed to you within the tender that it had sent previously. The good thing about the public sector is that, especially in the UK, is that it will always give you feedback on the proposal that you've sent. So you always know where you can improve and what kind of like mistakes you made when you sent like a proposal before. In case you meet the eligibility as well as the evaluation criteria, you are then down selected and you move on to the fourth phase where you are finally signing a contract with the public authority, and then kind of moving forward delivering the solution that you have like developed. So this is on a very high level the end-to-end procurement life cycle that you will have to go through when you are actually selling to the government. Now, the difference is that like from one authority to other, the way that they do the tendering process, that is like stage two that we mentioned here, differs. So there are like a few different common procedures that a government authority can like take in order to go to market. And there we will be today talking about like the most common procedures around that. So the first one is open tender. So open tender is when a government goes out to market and very transparently on a public platform will broadcast an opportunity. Now, in this case, like any and all suppliers who are interested in applying to the bid are allowed to. A direct award is when a government authority very directly awards um, a contract to a preferred supplier that they have like already worked with or have engaged. Again, they can just like prefer a supplier that they met at a market engagement event as well. So there are like different ways that you can like also have like two like very different softwares meet buyers and then like have like and get on a direct award. Frameworks and dynamic markets is where it gets interesting. Initially we talked about like procurement bodies. So frameworks and dynamic markets are basically these pre-approved pre-negotiated supplier agreements, which have like a list of like approved suppliers. So if you are a prop tech company, for example, and you're already on like a framework or a dynamic market, then like a government buyer who's interested in like buying a prop tech solution can get on the get can just come to like the framework or a dynamic market and get the solution without having to go to like the complete tendering process. The only difference between a framework and a dynamic market is around like the time limits. So you can so as a supplier you can get onto a framework once in 6 to 8 years, whereas a dynamic market you can get on anytime as it is more flexible and dynamic in nature. I know I've rushed on that concept particularly, but happy to take more questions and talk further about it. I thought it would be also interesting for you to kind of like look at what key frameworks in the sector are, especially for the prop tech industry. G Cloud and digital outcomes are two most commonly used frameworks that CCS, that is the Crown Commercial Service, host. It is the most these two are the most famous frameworks for like buying of technology solutions. We've also added examples of like prop tech suppliers who have like sold to the government using these frameworks. Vertical application solutions is a framework that is mainly for SaaS-based models. So if you are one, please take a look at it, and it's quite easy to get onto it when the next iteration comes out. Space-enabled and geospatial service (DPS) again is one of the most it's quite a niche framework, but it is a DPS, so easier to get onto, and then also like has a mini competition only. So like it depends. So you can very easily sell to government through that. Another popular DPS, which means that it's easy to get onto, is the Spark DPS. It is mainly for technology innovations and more community engagement type of like prop tech tools like Commonplace, Urban Intelligence have been able to like sell their services to the government through this framework. In my opinion, the most innovative framework of them all is like the Greater London Authority's Architecture Plus Urbanism framework, which has, I think, around 10 lots and is quite geared and designed to sell solutions around the built environment and consultancy services, particularly for London centric like suppliers. So feel free to take a look at it and like do apply to these frameworks and DPSs if they sound interesting and you have like a solution that is like mature enough to be in the market right now. Um, Cool. Moving on. Just because I know we've been talking a lot about the landscape, I thought it would also be interesting for you to know how all of this public procurement is regulated. So, at the national level, the public procurement is regulated by the Procurement Act, which came into effect just a year ago. These rules and the main thing that this act does is like kind of regulates what the thresholds for like and what are the expectations from these different government authorities once when they're like going to market. So currently the thresholds for like they like yeah, thresholds are like around 135,000 pounds for central government authorities and around like 200,000 pounds for like the wider public sector. All this to say that like when you are, which is going to be the like mostly the case when you are going to market, like under threshold procurements, I have more flexibility. They can like the government authorities can directly give you a award. You can get like a contract to by participating in a mini competition, as opposed to in case you are going for like larger procurements in the very beginning, they're a lot more stringent, a lot more difficult, and it is just like a bit more like tedious and onerous, especially on an SME, to go through them in the first place. So the idea is that you get into market, get start make your first steps into the sector by like yeah, by just like going to direct award and smaller procurements, and then kind of build your way up to like more strategic consortium based high threshold procurements. um, Again, that was mainly it on the very basic principles of like public procurement, and hopefully that helped you understand what the landscape looks like, what the key frameworks are, and how you can get started in that space. Now we are going to be talking about more on the soft skills that you should be investing in right now in order to sell yourself to the government. um, and in that case, there are like, I thought it would be nice to start with like three main tips. And they are basically that at this point, you need to understand the context, understand the context of like the problem areas that you're working in, what the policy drivers are, and who the key stakeholders are within the context you're working in. Then also like build a public sector narrative. I understand that like as startups and early stage startups especially, you have to do loads of pitching and storytelling with your investors, with other key stakeholders. But perfecting a public sector narrative and a public sector centered pitch is quite important, because it will help you understand and navigate like what to say to whom, and like what kind of like impact matters for what type of stakeholder in the sector. We also like we did talk about like different types of procurement routes and what the common procedures look like, but it is quite interesting and important for you to not only understand what these common procedures look like, but when you are like negotiating with government buyers, studying what your buyers like preferences and common like procurement routes look like, and then like suggesting a route that would work best for them rather than like suggesting one that works best for you. um, the whole point of this is to kind of like use these soft communication and soft methods to kind of like engage yourself within the sector in order to shape an opportunity, because only when you shape an opportunity can you then win it. For the next few slides, we'll be just like delving a bit deeper into these three important tips, starting with understanding the problem area. I understand that most of you today are like are building like prop tech solutions and are in early stages of it. And prop tech as a sector right now is absolutely emerging, quite exciting, and like also lies at the intersection of so many policy areas like local government reorganization, digital planning, homelessness, all of it. So like I think it's quite important for you to have like in-depth knowledge of the operational policy related and the political reality of the problem areas that you're working in. And that should be the first step in your strategy, to understand like what is your positionality, what kind of like what kind of policy area is your solution kind of tapping at, and what kind of like policy goals that it can achieve. So we've given like three quick questions that if you like find yourself being able to answer that, it just means that you have a very clear understanding of your problem area, and then that just would make it very easy for you to influence the buyers that you're working with. Again, I to completely understand that your solution is not going to be bought by a policymaker, but you're working in the public sector, so you will be working in the public sector. So it's just like important for you to frame your solution in a way that speaks to the sector and speaks to the people who are working in the sector on a day-to-day basis. So that's on understanding the problem area. Secondly, like knowing who your stakeholders are. I know there's this it is quite a complicated landscape, because while there are like people that are more external facing, they're not the ones who are buying what you are selling, and then there are people who are the ones who are going to be evaluating and working with you, but like it's just very difficult to find where they are and who they are. So we've just like come up with this like four clear stakeholder roles that to give you a clear picture of like who and when to engage with. So the first is the service team. These could be policy officials or technology leads or overseeing programs and budgets. These are the people who are going to be like working with you and who are interested in solving a very specific problem. So you need to like get in touch with them, engage with them, and like use them as like enablers and like influencers of your solution. Like if you have them on board as people who understand what your solution is doing, that is a good step and a way in. The second is the commercial stakeholder. These are people who are like working in procurement teams of like different government authorities and are the ones who are responsible for like engaging with markets, designing tenders, managing contracts, and also evaluating your bids. These are people who do not necessarily have like a very clear understanding of what prop tech is, what like the planning department aims to do. They are like looking to evaluate you on a very like commercial sense of what your solution and what your bid or proposal is trying to achieve, and if that meets what like the requirements stated by the internal teams are. You need to work and like understand how to answer and meet them where they are, and that is like a that is an important skill to learn as well. Senior officials, especially like ministers, CEOs, mayors, departmental directors, are like sitting right above the buyer, that is the service team that you will be working with. You might have to a lot of time your work will have to like consider the things that they're influenced by or the things that are of interest to them. So always keep a check on like what like they've been saying in public consultations and public sphere, so that you can like kind of position your solution in orientation and alignment with what they've been saying around. Politicians are at the apex of all of this, where even though you might not have like direct contact, direct like line of work with them, there's loads of like, again, like there will be loads of like policy discussions, policy point of views around like your solution that they will be talking about. So again, another like stakeholder that you should be constantly like in tune with and aligned with, and like kind of consistently like mold your solutions to be like answers to to the problems and challenges that they have been mentioning within the public sector. um, so the idea is that these are your key stakeholders, but it is the first two, that is the service team and the commercial teams, that are going to be like working with you. So if you kind of like engage with them a lot more and work with them, then you are like then you're getting like a very quick step in within the market and like, within the public sector. um yeah. The third point is about pitching. Like I said previously, I know that you all have already great experience in pitching, and the pitches that you are more used to are like an investor pitch, where you are like trying to sell your solution to like an investor so that they can then fund your solution. But a public sector's pitch is a bit different to that, in the sense that you have to, for building a compelling public sector's pitch, you will have to shift the focus on what the big national problem is, and then emphasize on how your company is helping the citizens, and different parts of the society or key national institutions involved in kind of solving that challenge. Here we've taken example of like a company called Patchwork, who is a digital recruitment tool that allows NHS hospitals to find and recruit part-time shift staff, as an example for like how they have built not one but like different kinds of pitches for their public sector market. So a sales pitch, which is done generally to like a government buyer, has to be a lot more like targeted. You need to like know exactly with who within the public sector you're trying to help. So here in this case, it's quite clear that that Patchwork aims to support HR teams as well as locum staff, and the outcome that they are promising is just faster and cheaper, vacancy and support to the NHS. Then there's a policy narrative speech. Now this is, like I said, big picture thinking. We're talking about like what the national problem within NHS is, and how your company as an SME is creating like this really novel, innovative solution that not only like is solving that problem, but is also adding a lot more like flexibility and satisfaction and social value to people's life who are working in the sector. So the idea is for sharing this is that you can then like not only that in alignment with your investment pitch, also create like a sales pitch and a policy narrative for your company. And when you go for like networking events, when you meet people, as well as when you go for like these market engagement events and activities, kind of like choose which one to pitch when you're talking to which kind of like stakeholder. So if you're talking to more of like a local leader, a senior official, then you have to use the policy narrative. If you're talking to more of a service team, more talking to someone from the commercial team, it's the sales pitch that you need to use. Hopefully that's useful. um, Moving on, just very quick tips on like how to kind of like perfect your pitch and kind of align it to what like public sector looks for. Don't be salesy. I completely understand that like the private sector ethos of things is that you have to like show numbers, show impact, all of that, but the government buyers do not look for don't like to be sold at. Focus on the problem, always start with the problem, show that you deeply care for it, show that you deeply understand it. Show a nuanced understanding of your customer. So I think it is quite important that you know like who you are like working with, what is the sector, what kind of customer you are like wanting to work with, and what is their life, and how is your solution going to like kind of change or transform the person that you are going to that you are not only going to work with, but also like the people that you are going to like impact through their solution. Don't overpromise. Be realistic, balanced, evidence based. Show impact now across like the different types of um, procurement procedures. One thing that is consistent is the need to show impact. Every type of procurement route will ask you to give tangible evidence and impact from all projects, case studies, partnerships, all of that. And even if you are like quite early and you do not have like enough like case studies to prove, if anyone in your team, or if you have like personal experience of working with government, personal experience of working in that in the problem area that you are kind of like trying to solve, talk about it. Talk about like how the solution came to be, and that itself will do the job of showing impact. Finally, build a compelling business case. The idea is that not only to like talk about the impact and like the outcomes that your solution will be targeting, but also talking about what kind of like commercial, economic, as well as social dimension your solution is touching. A business case, again, they're like it is quite a technical document, and you need to there's loads of like government resources on it that we can for sure share with you. But building a business case is basically building a really well structured and very in depth pitch that kind of like touches on these different strategic, economic, commercial, and financial, social outcomes, and different accounts of like what your solution is trying to do. Um, yeah, so just to say that, like, if you in that case are able to like understand the context, build a public sector narrative, and identify routes to market, then you short have like a big shot at like getting your not only your like foot into the public sector market, but very easily make enough connections and engagements that like you have like a recurring revenue stream. um, for the final point, we'll be just touching on the key policy changes that have happened within the past year, just so that you know what are the changes that will affect you when you are in the market. The first one is the Procurement Act. So the Procurement Act 2023 was implemented last year after 3 years of consultation, drafting, and parliamentary scrutiny. This act is considered to be politically neutral, even though it was implemented just post Brexit, and is seen as like a deviation from the EU procurement derivatives and the UK PCR 2015. Um, the main thing about like the Procurement Act is that it has like started and like kind of implemented these really innovative procurement mechanisms and procedures in the market that have kind of like enabled loads of flexibility, and have made it a lot more simple and easy to work with the public sector now than it was a few years ago. We'll be talking about a few of those measures. So the first and the most important one is the competitive flexible procedure. So it is a procedure that kind of affects all the different procurement routes that we talked about. A lot of it is a lot like most of these routes are a lot more flexible in terms of they are a lot more like they prioritize engagement. If you have been like bidding and like going through the procurement process in the last few years, you might have seen that there's loads of second stage interviews, loads of like market engagement events happening, and lots of like public consultations on what like requirements around certain specific buying strategy should be. So that is all because of the competitive flexible procedure, where it has made the buying process a lot more like collaborative between the buyer and supplier, rather than it being like the buyer asking for something and then like trying to find someone in the market who can supply it. The second one is meet versus band. So previously, the evaluation criteria for most tenders was that were choosing, like that the government authorities were prioritizing to choose a com- like a the tender that's most economically advantageous. So MEET stands for most economically advantageous tender, but now that has changed to MAT, which stands for most advantageous tender. What that in very simple words means that now it's not only the economics or like the value or the price that is like the most important criteria for evaluation, but it is like looking at things like social value, quality, and other things like that will make um, a solution a lot more like important, and why it would be chosen over others when in the last stage of the tendering process. um, Now, like we talked about frameworks and dynamic markets, there are something called open frameworks and dynamic markets now, which means that it is now a lot more easy on frameworks. You don't have to wait for like the 6 to 8 year period. These frameworks and dynamic markets open a lot more regularly, kind of like helping you get onto this and sell to the government a lot more easily. There's also huge transparency and data push, which means that governments are now more and more putting out data about how they have contracted and how they've sold to the government. And this includes pipeline notices, which kind of tells you what kind of like how much and what the future spend of these different government authorities looks like. Finally, authorities now also have to think like more strategically about the barriers faced by SMEs. Loads of times government authorities are now taking very 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 strategic like policies, making internal policies about how like they will be prioritizing SMEs, and also like lowering down the administrative procurement burden on SMEs when they run a procurement. So when you are like bidding next time, feel free to reach out to a government authority and ask them for like resources or any, or to ask them like what kind of like reasonable adjustments they're like willing to do for like an SME, as like a way to know like what kind of like options you have for yourself. Finally, this is like a very short but like a quite an important point where I we know that like the public sector is going through something really massive and path breaking right now, which is the local government reorganization, LGR. It is going to affect 21 two-tier county areas, and this is going to open up massive new opportunities to work with local authorities across the sector, especially in case of prop tech. It seems to be like that this is going to open loads of work with planning authorities across the planning process. And yeah, of course, this is still in like very, very nascent and initial stages, but everyone in the sector is quite excited about like the opportunities and the way this particular structural change in the system is going to affect for like loads of like digital and transformational change for long term, and like help and to help particularly local councils reach better targets and better outcomes in the prop tech, through especially using prop tech. So that's mainly